from the National Science Foundation at the Smart and Connected Health Program here in District for Computer and Information Science and Engineering. I'm here today to introduce speaker James Schmiedeler. He's an associate professor at the Notre Dame University in the College of Engineering. I'm lucky today to have him talking about use of gaming peripherals in acute rehabilitation of following stroke. And this is one of the projects funded by the Smart and Connected Health Program, which is 13-543. Schmiedeler conducts his research in the Locomotion and Biometrics Laboratory in the College of Engineering. His interests fall broadly into the area of kinematics, dynamics, and machine design, particularly applied to the development of robotic systems and understanding of human motor coordination. His is on multiple modes of locomotion, human recovery from stroke, spinal cord injury, robot-assisted rehabilitation, prosthetic devices, mechanical energy storage for vehicles, and the shape-changing mechanisms. He's here today about his work in stroke rehabilitation, and with that, I'll give it to you, Dr. Schmiedeler.
Thanks. It's a great pleasure to talk about the work I've been doing with a large group of collaborators on inexpensive gaming peripherals hope to improve the region of balance following stroke. So it's an interdisciplinary research team. You can see me there in the picture. I'm the mechanical engineer on the team who focuses on the control systems perspective and the biohuman mechanics. Here in the back of this photo is our computer science colleague. He focuses on the data networking piece. And two colleagues from psychology. All of these researchers are at the University of Notre Dame. Mike Vallant and Chuck Kroll focus on the human-computer interaction piece and some of the self-awareness analysis that we do with the patient population. And I'm exceptionally fortunate to have a really talented group of clinical collaborators from Memorial Hospital here in South Bend, Indiana. Four of the staff members here, including some of the therapists who helped us develop the software and who actually do the data collection with the acute stroke patients in their clinics. This has been a really fortunate collaboration for me. I'm greatly appreciative to this group. I'm not circled in the PhD student, former PhD student Michael Kennedy, who did a lot of the work that's presented here. So the balance disability is a very common problem following stroke. I think most people are aware that stroke is a damage to the brain that's due to a blood supply interruption. It's a very frequent injury in the U.S. with, affecting over 50,000 people every year. But then the number gets really staggering when we think that as many % of them experience some balance disability as a result of the stroke. Because the recovery of balance is essential to being able to perform the activities of daily living. The recovery of balance can often make the real critical difference between going to a long-term care facility and being returned home. So it's an important focus of therapy, particularly shortly after the stroke itself. Visual feedback to aid balance performance. This is not a new concept, and there's a number of products. I'm showing 3 of them here that are available on the market. There have been enough research studies that show that visual feedback aids in balance performance. But there's some question as to what the mechanisms of that influence are. And that's one of the things that we've been trying to unpack in our research. We'll also say contrast, these are, again, off-the-shelf commercial systems that are more than what we're presenting, and associated with that have a higher price tag. So we're trying to leverage in this work the very low cost of video gaming peripherals, relatively, advanced measurement systems they have inside them, and balance there with visual feedback so that it's accessible to anyone around the country, in any clinic, and in people's homes. So in terms of the merit of this project, we're going to talk about 3 different things today. How do different types of feedback affect subjects in their standing balance? How do the balance data that we collect to improve therapy and ultimately lead to better functional outcomes for the patients? And then a really interesting topic we're just going to touch on is how the presence of that visual feedback the therapist's interactions. So let's definitions we'll use throughout the presentation and then an introduction to the gaming peripherals. Sort of our cartoon of human balance and center of mass is a fairly standard definition. Simply the point where one can consider all mass to be concentrated. For balance purposes, we're very interested in what we're going to define as center of gravity, which is the projection of that center of mass onto the support surface on which the subject is standing. Diagram. To move center of mass or center of gravity, one actually has to do motion capture and estimate where the center of mass is located with some model of the person. And done extensively with gaming peripherals such as the Xbox Kinect. I'm not going to present that in this work because there's some uncertainty that simply can't be removed from that calculation. And so instead we're going to concentrate on measurement of the center of pressure, where the point of the ground where the natural ground force can take into act. That's here at the bottom. And this is with force plates and similar force plate that you can purchase with, say, the Nintendo Wii system, the balance board. And that is the measurement device that we've been using. We use it because it's a relatively inexpensive and relatively accurate measurement equipment that is the accessibility of the system. We call the system the WeHab system, one, because it involves Wii components, two, because we believe it builds a more collaborative environment for the patient and the therapist, so that interconnection between the two is a strong one. And here you see it involves the patient standing on a balance board. The balance board is Bluetooth connected to a laptop where we write our own software. Any of the Nintendo games from the Wii Fit system, we write our therapy, if you will, that allow the patients and the therapist to go through the standard balance activity as they would otherwise, only now recording the data and instrumenting them. The display of the computer screen in front of the patient, typically raised to eye level, and may or may not be auditory feedback provided via speakers. The therapists we work with in the clinic using the system, you'll see in this photograph there are two balance boards, and the common way we do the data collection, it allows complete separation of force measurement on left and right feet. That doesn't work so well for patients with walkers because the walker won't typically fit two balance boards, but it will fit quite nicely around just one of them, and so that's option as well. Another note in this figure, the therapist on the right, if you see between the two, is controlling the software with a Wiimote, and this allows the therapist to be close to the patient, in this case simulated by a second therapist, to prevent falls, but to control the software running on the laptop. Right. We evaluate balance in two ways. One is a static standing balance activity, where we're simply asking the subjects to maintain quiet stance with their center of mass or center pressure centered under the body, and what the trace of the center of pressure for a standard static balance task would look like. There's some natural wonder to it. And evaluation is done based on both symmetry and the sway associated with that center of pressure movement. Exactly as you would expect, simply by the mean position of that center of pressure, and then the most common metric of sway in the balance literature is the deviation of that center of pressure motion during a static task. Found with a therapist's help that lateral weight shifting is a common task in therapy sessions, and we actually get more information from the task than we do from static balance, in part because it's a more challenging task. And so here in the diagram we see the green dot is representing the center of pressure, and the blue rectangle is representing the target to which the subject is asked to shift. And so one of the metrics we use to evaluate is the speed. And we see here the red trace of the motion of the center of pressure, and the time from the start of that motion until the time which the marker hitting the center of pressure enters the target is a metric of how fast the shift took place, or the shift speed. You may have noticed in the animation that the center of pressure actually moves in the opposite direction of target prior to its shift. This is an unavoidable characteristic of essentially push off to your center of mass in the direction of the shift. Full system world, we would call that a class non-minimum phase. And so we measure this as what we call the non-minimum phase behavior, which is how far the center of pressure moves in the opposite direction of the shift, of how strongly the subject is initiating the shift. And so a lower value of the non-minimum phase behavior would indicate a much stronger initiation force for the shift. So that's the background. Let's address the questions of intellectual merit. How do differences of feedback affect the subjects in their standing balance activities? So what we call the direct center of pressure feedback, where we have an individual marker that locates the center of pressure, a target in this case shown as a blue. This feedback can be either two-dimensional or one-dimensional. In most of it, it's provided two-dimensional, which see the marker move in both the anterior-posterior direction as well as the medial-lateral direction. Our primary lateral weight shifting, though, you could only provide motion in the medial-lateral direction and ignore the anterior-posterior motion. The feedback type we consider, that all of which are common, or both of these are common in the off-the-shelf existing systems, is elastic distribution. So we see here bars indicate the percentage of weight supported on the left and right feet. So this is a one-dimensional type of feedback because it's just the percentage of weight, but you add, in this case, numerical values that have intuitive sense as to how much pressure is on the left and right. And so it was designed to see, do you have a different effect on the performance of balance in young, healthy subjects. And then we initially looked at the young healthies in a group of 79, and then to be more consistent with our stroke population, we looked at an age-matched healthy group of older subjects. We looked at static balance and their weight shifting, and our analysis was done with linear mixed models. Found, to some extent, to a surprise, that the direct center pressure feedback led to reduced sway in the static case. No difference between the two types of feedback in terms of sway. We hypothesized that because maintaining isometric posture is a relatively simple task. Using the sway that's natural in static posture is a bit more challenging, and so we see that reduced sway with direct center feedback. We also see reduced shift time in the dynamic weight shifting task, again associated with that direct center pressure feedback being superior to the lateral weight distribution. Again, these are relatively simple tasks performed by healthy subjects. Our hypothesis here is based on some existing literature that shows that a coordinate transformation in processing feedback can create challenges. The weight distribution bars, they move exclusively in a vertical direction. Your weight shifting is moving in a medial lateral direction. Cognitive processing of the 90-degree rotation of the feedback, we hypothesize to explain why the subjects performed, in a sense, our metrics better using the direct center of pressure feedback. Impacts of this result in terms of therapy, you imagine a therapist might choose to select the type of feedback to manage the difficulty of the task. So who is having tremendous balance difficulties, better off receiving the feedback that is most beneficial. Where who is improving, you may want to scale back the aid that's provided to make the task more challenging. Some who are not yet even able to stand, seated balance activities where we're talking about postural of the torso that may be useful. There's always a factor that our young healthy subjects had excellent vision, and visual field impairments are common, or other ocular pathology are common in stroke populations. And so to tailor the feedback to those. In that case, the lateral distribution with the large bars for some of these subjects may be a better solution despite the potentially greater difficulty in performing the task. All right, This led us to a concept of feedback filtering. So it's changing the type of feedback can affect the performance, perhaps could manipulate the feedback, encourage a type of performance that we desire. And so in the literature, in terms of static balance, we've seen researchers have added delayed visual feedback. And the unhealthy subjects we've looked at so far was, in the case, essentially reduced use of the feedback for modulating the balance. In the same study with older healthy subjects, we saw increased sway when feedback delay was entered. And in related work, when a stroke population looked at this, there was essentially effect of feedback delay, again, exclusively in a static balance test. And, we want to add filtering visual feedback not exclusively in static, but primarily in the dynamic weight shifting task. Because early on in shift, because of that non-minimum phase behavior with the center of pressing in the opposite direction, we have a large discrepancy between where the center of gravity is and where the center of pressure is moving. This move in the direction. It's pressure that results from the action forces. And so we can reduce that apparent non-minimum phase behavior with filtering. However, later in the shift, delay introduced by that same filtering will cause a discrepancy between the center of pressure and the center of gravity. So reducing the discrepancy early in the shift, reducing it late in the shift, and we wanted to look at that effect. So in the previous study, we approached a young healthy population first. We took 35 young healthy subjects doing lateral weight shifting. And the feedback we provided them using the moving average filter with a range of sample sizes, presenting from 10 to 58, essentially increased filtering, or you can think about it as increased delay in the motion. It's linear mixed models analysis. Again, our results are somewhat surprising. When we increase the filtering, subjects shift faster. They actually reduce the time of their shift. Not that the visual feedback showed, because there was time added by the filtering. Actual shift time was, and so, in some sense, that's an improved balance performance. An increase in their non-minimum phase behavior. We saw an increase in the forcefulness with which they initiated their shifts. And so, again, this is a little surprising. We provide feedback that slows down the apparent shift, and subjects respond by the speed and the rigor with which they're shifting. Explained by an understanding of balance control that subjects are directly controlling their center of pressure. Rather, they're controlling their center of mass or center of gravity position. And as they see a disconnect between the visual feedback as to their center of pressure and their actual center of gravity, they rely on it, and they rely more on their other signals, their vestibular inputs, from their proprioceptive inputs, from other sources around the room. Okay, this might have a broader impact on therapy. We're excited about the possibility of encouraging strokes to have more vigorous shifts, simply by a filter to the feedback they receive for the task they're already doing. This is interesting if you imagine a hemiparetic patient who has weakness on one side, and better ability to shift in one direction than another could encourage that more shifting in the direction where they need the most work, and the favored direction could be provided with sort of a conventional feedback. Directions, and talk about our quantitative balance data, how we might be able to use that to therapy and ultimately better functional outcomes. We've been analyzing it with a relatively simple inverted pendulum model that I've shown here, about as simple a model of lateral weight shifting as we could go. And the COR is the center of rotation of the body. We present all of the mass concentrated at the center of mass, and it's the lateral shifting of the pressure in terms of the rotation of the inverted pendulum. And we assume a simple linear control system. Again, we're setting our analysis here with the possible explanation. The neuro is a simple PD controller. It's representative of the whole system systems, neural pathways, and even visual feedback. Plant of simple inverted pendulum body that allows us to then compute the center of pressure, and the output of the system is the variation of the center of pressure. What we've is determine the control gains for proportional and derivative terms that allow us with our model to match the data we collect. And so we analyzed a subset of the patient and healthy subject populations that we had previously tested. So 74 of our young healthy, 18 of our age-matched healthy, and then 6 of our clinical subjects. And we choose in an optimization algorithm the gains that allow us to match the duration of the shift and phase behavior, that the full shift initiation results. So these are plots, the proportional gains computed across and green the clinical subjects, the age-matched subjects, and in blue the young healthy subjects. We can see that the older subjects, clinical age-matched, are using a stiffer control strategy, a much proportional gain on average. We'll see higher variability among those populations in the error bars, which is not a surprise at all. And we have any statistical difference between the clinical and the age-matched, have a statistical difference between the young healthy and the other two in terms of the proportional gain. With the color scheme for the derivative gain, and we see again, with that stiffer control strategy, we see much higher damping control. Again, for both the subjects in green and the age-matched older subjects in red. Very little difference between those, relatively high variability for them, but a really small damping term in the young healthy subjects. We'll see here is the control system. There's a planned shift time. Input is assumed for motion of the center of pressure. And we see here, this is where we start to see our first difference between the clinical and the age-matched healthy subjects. The shift time for the clinical subject is significant in terms of being longer than their age-matched healthy counterparts. Is slightly larger than the young healthy too. And so what we take away from this is there may be some sort of untapped control potential in the clinical subjects, that they tailor control strategies to the age-healthy subjects. They are planning slower shifts. And so our impact for therapy, I hope that this result can inform therapy activities that a therapist might choose for an individual patient. That we motivate, filter the feedback to encourage those more vigorous shifts that would take less time, that our full analysis seems to suggest that at least some of the clinical population may be capable of, and simply gain perhaps the confidence to complete them. Final question here in terms of intellectual merit, and these are some ongoing results. They're not finished, and how the feedback alters the patient-therapist interaction during their therapy sessions. And this we're realizing of the therapy sessions from these subjects. So we take 66 of our clinical subjects over 111 therapy sessions. So some of these subjects are receiving multiple sessions with the unit, which is certainly desirable. We drive and code and then perform text mining on the analysis. Really came out of anecdotal evidence from our therapists indicating that they felt like the allowed them to be more collaborative with the study they were doing, that tended to believe their evaluations more. There was a confidence in the feedback. And so we analyzed just the type of communication that's going on. We see a difference in these between an asking action and a telling action. Less than 20% of the communication is asking a question, and and more than 50% of the communication between the therapist and the subject is declarative, is a telling type action. And it was an analysis of just the most common words explain what's things like your, shift, we, terms like that are what we're looking for. This isn't complete. Looking to help therapists understand how the visual feedback affects the patient interactions, and that might motivate the use of the visual feedback to achieve the more collaborative therapy that anecdotally they have shared with us that they have found to be the case. It's been quite beneficial in broader impacts outside of the clinic as well. This is an area that young kids really kind of like. They're familiar with the peripherals from the grading systems. A large number of demonstrations in kids K through 12. What we're able to do is essentially manipulate the feedback to give the children the feeling of what it would be like to have a stroke. So in the little girl standing on the board is leaning very, very far to her right. What we've done in this case is it's given her the feeling of right-sided weakness. And so visual feedback, she has to shift a very large amount to the right side to make the marker move a small amount. And this gives them some sense of what it might be like to have some of the deficits for the stroke patients. And it also gives them a sense of how computer programming and human biomechanics and studying the STEM disciplines can have a direct impact on people's lives. Certainly a number of challenges in this work. We've worked almost exclusively with an acute stroke population. This is the most dynamic period of change in their progress, and so that's the time where we think we can have the most impact. As a result, there's a high degree of variability in the data. That's the nature of this particular population, particularly at that time. And we work with clinical collaborators who, again, have been fantastic, but it's a non-research clinical environment. And so it's not a randomized control study. They're not providing some of the subjects with the therapy and others without. They're eventually using it for anyone who walks in the door that they think can benefit. That advantages, right? We believe the acute phase is where we have the opportunity to have the maximal impact on improving the outcomes for these patients. In developing the system because we have very realistic clinical constraints. These subjects receive at most 30 minutes of balanced therapy a day. And very clearly, anything we did that took time away from that was reducing the amount of therapy they were getting. The system had to be very simple, very easy to use, very quick to set up. Strategies, though, to get reliable data. Therapists have agreed to do a 2-minute assessment of static and dynamic weight shifting at the beginning of every session. I give a baseline so that if a subject does a completely different therapy on our system that different from the last time, we have something that we can compare. And you see results here that we've moved from young, healthy subjects to age-matched healthy subjects to the clinical population, where we essentially tried to validate our approach with an installation to access to and implement in the clinic only when we're essentially ready for prime time. Research in the work I mentioned, the auditory feedback is a study we're getting ready to start here soon with our young healthy subjects to compare with visual feedback. Filtering work also spawned some interest in what's called error augmentation. So if we provide a standard trajectory and then if the too rapidly or too slowly, feedback that they're slower or even faster than the car to try to drive them to that ideal work is ongoing. We've shifted from the simple PD control model to look at an optimal control model to see if that captures the shifting performance of a larger number of our subjects, a larger variety of shifts, and we're looking at the possibility of analyzing how these subjects respond to perturbations to the target. So if they are to move the target in the midst of their shift, how do they react to that, and how potentially can we expect that with a control system model? Ongoing, we've begun collecting data from therapy sessions with the same therapist when they choose not to use the visual feedback, and we look to compare our results from when we do visual feedback to those therapists when they do not, and really analyze what's the difference that the feedback is providing to those therapy interactions. Broader impacts, our clinical collaborators are always asking for improved clinical reports that be essentially directly filed into their systems and provide a documentation of the therapy that was done. One of the advantages of using the peripherals is that you get data on specific performance. And we have an exhibitor booth scheduled for the American Physical Therapy Association's combined section meeting in February, offering free release of the software. We'll set free release online before the physical therapy conference, advertising and demonstrating it at the exhibitor booth at that conference. These are the contact information for the three lead investigators, myself in mechanical engineering, Aaron Striegel in computer science, Chuck Kroll, psychology, all here at Notre Dame. I will conclude the webinar, the references that were cited, and then some of the publications that have come out of this work. Thanks for joining us to hear research we've been doing through the Smart and Connected Health program.
Thank you so much. This is Wendy Nelson. I just want to say thank you. That was really a wonderful presentation. Many of the principles that we've done in Smart Health and really this use-inspired basic research. So, Dr. Schmiedeler, I want to thank you and your team. This is really interesting. We'll look forward to updates as we go. But thank you for attending a Smart and Connected Health webinar. We really appreciate it.